One of the strangest things I've watched people do with money is this. They will spend half an afternoon driving across town to save a few dollars on something forgettable. Then, almost without thinking, they will make another decision later that quietly costs them thousands. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way anyone announces, just a little carelessness in a place that actually mattered. That pattern has interested me for a long time, because it reveals a deeper truth about how most people think about money. They assume the goal is to spend less. I do not think that is the goal. The goal is to spend with judgment. Those are very different skills. A person can become extremely good at minimizing tiny expenses and still remain poor in the ways that matter. He can feel discipline while slowly weakening his future. He can take pride in small savings while making large invisible losses. That is the kind of arithmetic that ruins a great many lives. I have spent most of my life around capital, not only my own. Other people as businesses, investments, managers, salesmen, ordinary families trying to move ahead, people with far too much money, people with very little. And one thing became clear to me very early. Money by itself is not intelligence. Money simply magnifies whatever understanding or misunderstanding a person already has. If a person understands value, money becomes a tool. If a person misunderstands value, money becomes a source of anxiety, theater, and quiet self-sabotage. That is why some people can earn a lot and still remain structurally weak. And it is why some people with more modest means manage to build something surprisingly durable over time. They are not playing the same game. The weak game is about reducing every visible cost. The stronger game is about recognizing which costs deserve respect and which ones deserve compression. That distinction changes almost everything. A lot of people have been trained to worship cheapness. They call it being careful. They call it being disciplined. They call it being smart with money. Sometimes it is. Often it is fear, wearing the clothes of prudence. There is a big difference between refusing waste and refusing value. I like refusing waste. I have spent my entire life refusing all kinds of waste. But I never wanted cheapness to become a religion, because once cheapness becomes a religion, people begin sacrificing the wrong things on its altar. They sacrifice time, they sacrifice learning. They sacrifice energy, they sacrifice protection, they sacrifice judgment, they sacrifice future earning power. Then they turn around and congratulate themselves for having saved $20 in some utterly unimportant corner of life. That is not wisdom. That is misallocation. And misallocation, repeated often enough, is what keeps people trapped. I like thinking about money the way I think about capital allocation inside a business. Every dollar has a job. Some dollars keep the machine running. Some dollars defend the machine. Some dollars improve the machine. Some dollars expand the machine. Some dollars buy things that disappear the moment they are consumed. The real skill is not spending nothing. The real skill is knowing which category you are in before the money leaves your hand. Once you understand that, a great many everyday financial choices look very different. Suddenly, a cheap decision can become an expensive one, and an expensive decision can become one of the best bargains in your whole life. That is the heart of what I want to say. There are certain areas where trying to save money aggressively is often one of the most expensive habits a person can have. Not because spending more is automatically better. It is not. Because in these areas, the so-called savings usually destroy something much more valuable than cash time. Energy, health, safety, clarity, opportunity, future income, compounding. These are the currencies the world quietly runs on. Most people notice the dollars and ignore the deeper bill. I never wanted to make that mistake. The first place I learned not to be cheap was knowledge. This surprises people because we live in an age where the public loves free information, free videos, free articles, free threads, free advice from somebody's neighbor who once made money in a hot market and has been spiritually living off that 1 year ever since. People are very proud of learning things for free. Sometimes that makes sense. I read a tremendous amount and much of it costs very little. I have nothing against inexpensive learning. What I distrust is the idea that free information is automatically cheap. It is often extremely expensive. It costs time, and time is the one resource that becomes more valuable as you understand life better. If you want to learn a language, build a business, improve your investing, develop a marketable skill, understand tax strategy, improve your health, or change the quality of your life, free information can be helpful. It can also become a swamp. One video leads to another. One article points to 5 more. One half-informed teacher contradicts another half-informed teacher. A year passes. Then 2, you become fluent in consuming advice and remain remarkably poor at making progress. That is not a good trade. When people hesitate to pay a competent teacher, a well-built course, a real mentor, or serious guidance in an area that matters, they often think they are being cautious. Very often they are simply pricing their own time far too low. That is a common disease. A person will spend $500 upgrading a suitcase, a phone, or a watch because the purchase is visible and emotionally satisfying. Then that same person will hesitate to spend $500 learning a skill that could raise his income by thousands a year for the next decade. That is not a financial problem first. That is a perception problem. He sees the price, he does not see the return. That is why people stay stuck. They evaluate personal development like consumers and evaluate consumption like investors. They have the categories reversed. If paying for better knowledge shortens the time between ignorance and competence, then the purchase should not be viewed only as expense. It should be viewed as acceleration. Acceleration matters enormously in life, not because you must hurry everything, because every year spent wandering inefficiently through confusion is a year not spent compounding what you could have been doing from a stronger base. This is one reason I have always admired people who treat serious learning as capital expenditure rather than as indulgence. They are not buying information. They are buying compressed trial and error. They are buying fewer wrong turns. They are buying a shorter road to usable competence. That can be one of the highest returning uses of money a human being can make. The person who pays for real understanding when it matters often looks less frugal than the person piecing together random scraps for free. 5 years later, the supposedly frugal one is often far behind. That is because free information has a way of hiding its true invoice. You pay in drift, you pay in delay, you pay in confusion, you pay in slow progress. I have never liked paying in those currencies when a sensible amount of money could have eliminated much of the waste. That same principle becomes even clearer when you think about the moments in life that do not repeat. This is the second place I learned not to be cheap, milestone memories. Now, here again I want to be careful. I am not arguing for extravagance. I do not admire extravagant people simply because they spent a lot. Spending a fortune on an event does not automatically make it meaningful. People can waste enormous sums trying to impress other people and call it memory making. That is not what I mean. What I mean is simpler. There are a handful of moments in life that do not come back. A wedding, a meaningful anniversary, a graduation, a reunion where older family members are still able to travel, a birthday that gathers the right people while everyone is still healthy enough to be in the room, a trip with your parents before age takes too much from them, a moment where children are still young enough to want your full presence. These things have a very strict policy. They do not occur indefinitely. The world of spreadsheets has a weakness here. Spreadsheets are good at measuring recurring numbers. They are terrible at measuring once, and life contains more once than people realize. A person who becomes too proud of squeezing every possible dollar out of life can end up squeezing out the very meaning he was supposed to be building all the money for. That is a tragic irony. I have met many people who can account precisely for what they saved over the years. Very few can tell me with real joy about the detergent they bought more cheaply in 1994. No one gathers the grandchildren and says, "Let me tell you about the unforgettable afternoon when I drove 20 extra minutes to save $8 on household supplies." No one holds that memory close. People remember moments of human significance. People remember who was there, what was said, who laughed, who cried, who showed up, what it felt like to have everyone at the same table while life was still kind enough to allow it. That matters. Money can be rebuilt, income can return, portfolios can recover. Some moments do not get a second issue. That does not mean overspend wildly whenever the word memory appears. It means understand rarity. Rarity should change how you allocate money. There is nothing irrational about spending meaningfully on a moment whose value is not reproducible later. In fact, refusing to do so because of shallow short-term frugality can be far more expensive than the cost itself. If the whole purpose of money is to improve life, and life includes moments that shape memory and family meaning, then treating every such moment as a line item to be minimized is not intelligent. It is emotionally illiterate. A wise person spends carefully on ordinary repetition and more generously on truly irreplaceable moments. That is not inconsistency. That is judgment. The third place I learned not to be cheap is health. This should not be controversial. And yet it is astonishing how many people treat their own body like a machine they can endlessly exploit and cheaply maintain while expecting high performance for decades. If someone gave you a car and told you it was the only car you would ever have for the rest of your life, you would probably become much more serious about maintenance. You would listen to strange noises, you would change the oil, you would pay attention to tires. You would not skip every repair to save a little cash if the consequence was losing the machine entirely. And yet people do this with their own bodies all the time. They save in the wrong places, they buy the cheapest fuel, they ignore sleep, they call movement optional, they treat chronic stress as an ordinary personality feature. Then they wonder why their decisions are worse. Their energy is lower, their patience is thinner, their emotions more erratic, and their work output weaker. The body is not just part of life. It is the platform from which all work, thought, judgment, and income are generated. To be careless there is not thrift. It is destruction masquerading as efficiency. I am not suggesting that money automatically buys health. Of course it does not. But there is a clear point here. Good food is not merely consumption. Proper medical care is not merely expense. Sleep is not laziness. Exercise is not cosmetic. These are inputs to the primary productive asset in your life. You people obsess over the return on stocks and ignore the return on a better functioning mind and body. That is one reason so many of them stay inefficient. They are trying to run a lifetime investment program from a damaged operating system. A person who sleeps well, eats sensibly, moves consistently, and takes health seriously is not simply living nicely. He is improving his cognitive clarity, emotional steadiness, work quality, and odds of being able to enjoy whatever wealth he builds. That is a magnificent return. The great joke is that people will spend without hesitation on many forms of low-grade comfort that make life softer for an hour, but resist spending or prioritizing the things that make life stronger for years. That is backward. I would rather own a smaller car and a stronger body than the reverse. A person with good health has options. A person with deteriorating health does not. That matters more with age. But it matters at every stage. Health is not only about living longer, it is about functioning better while you live. And better functioning is a large economic advantage, whether people want to admit it or not. Now we come to something that sounds less philosophical but matters just as much: tools. I have always believed there is a phase in life where being scrappy is useful. When you are starting, simplicity teaches you what matters. You do not need the finest equipment in the world to learn fundamentals. In fact, a little constraint can be very clarifying, but there comes a point where poor tools stop building character and start stealing output. That is when cheapness becomes expensive again. I have seen this in every field: a creator working on a computer that freezes every hour, a tradesman using unreliable equipment that slows every job, a photographer fighting a camera that undercuts his skill, an editor trapped in software so clumsy it doubles the time required, a worker using tools that turn easy work into friction. That is not toughness. That is inefficiency. If a better tool saves you an hour a day, then you are no longer debating a gadget purchase. You are debating a capacity increase. And capacity increase is one of the most attractive investments in the world. Suppose your time is worth even a modest amount. Multiply that by an hour saved each day across a year. The result becomes obvious very quickly. A better tool is often not spending. It is acquisition of productive leverage. This is where people get confused because they focus on purchase price instead of total economic effect. They see the $400 cost and ignore the thousands of dollars of time, opportunity, output, or quality it might generate or preserve. Again, the categories are reversed. If the tool is for ego, be careful. If the tool is for output, take it seriously. The world rewards people who can produce valuable work efficiently. A good tool does not create talent. It allows talent to show up with less friction. That is worth a great deal. I have no patience for decorative tools, but I have enormous respect for productive ones. In many cases, the most rational thing a person can buy is not something for consumption at all, but something that lets him work better, faster, or at higher quality for years to come. That is not indulgence. It is practical capital allocation. Then we come to a subject that people avoid because it feels boring until the day it becomes devastating. Safety and security. Nobody enjoys paying for protection. No one wakes up excited about insurance premiums or secure storage or backup systems or preventive measures. Protection does not flatter the ego. It does not create a dramatic story to tell at dinner. That is fine. It still matters enormously. One of the first principles in investing is to protect the downside. A person can spend years building wealth and then wipe out a surprising amount of progress through one badly protected event. That is how life works. A single uninsured loss can erase many years of careful saving. A security lapse can destroy something irreplaceable: a lawsuit, a health event, a theft, a fire, a flood, a mistake, an accident, an absence of basic risk management. These are the sorts of things that make supposedly careful people look reckless in hindsight. I have never found hindsight especially comforting. I prefer prevention. This is another place where the invoice of cheapness is hidden until it becomes enormous. A person sees the yearly cost of proper insurance and thinks he is saving money by reducing or skipping it. A person sees the cost of secure storage, better locks, real cybersecurity, legal protections, or backup systems and thinks it sounds unnecessary. Then one bad day arrives and reveals that the small annual savings were one of the worst bargains he ever made. The The real job of money is not just to create upside, it is to keep a bad day from erasing too many good years. That is a very useful way to think. People who only think in terms of growth become fragile. Growth matters. Protection matters too. The strongest financial life is not the one that chases return at all times. It is the one that grows and defends intelligently. That is why I do not think of insurance and basic protective systems as dead money. I think of them as preserving the continuity of the machine. Continuity is priceless. If a person can spend a modest amount to keep catastrophe from destroying compounding, I usually consider that an attractive trade because compounding needs survival more than it needs cleverness. That is a truth most people learn too late. Now let me move to a place where false confidence becomes especially expensive. Professionals, lawyers, accountants, tax advisors, specialists in matters where detail has enormous economic consequence. People love doing things themselves because doing things yourself flatters the ego. You feel capable, you feel independent, you feel clever for not paying someone. Sometimes that is perfectly fine. I have done a great deal of my own thinking over the years. I never wanted to become dependent on expertise. I did not at least partially understand, but there is a point at which do it yourself becomes do it expensively. There is a concept I've always liked and tried to live by. Circle of competence. It is one of the most important ideas in all of investing and business. The idea is not that you must know everything. It is that you must know clearly where your knowledge is strong and where it stops. That second part is what saves you. Most people do not get hurt because they were ignorant and humble. They get hurt because they were ignorant and certain. That combination is poison. In law, taxes, contracts, regulatory details, estate matters, and other high consequence areas, tiny details can create enormous differences in outcome. One missed clause, one misunderstood deduction, one avoidable structure problem, one mistaken filing, one decision made with partial understanding and full confidence. The bill arrives later, often much later. That is the worst kind. Because by the time the consequence becomes visible, the cost of correction is far higher than the cost of proper advice would have been. I have seen people pay a few hundred or a few thousand for competent professional guidance and save 10 times that much, sometimes much more. Simply because someone with real expertise saw the structure differently. That is not expense. That is intelligent purchasing of judgment. You must not become lazy here either. Do not assume every expensive professional is good. Many are mediocre, some are terrible. You still need judgment. But when the issue is significant and genuinely outside your competence, refusing to pay for help can be one of the dumbest forms of cheapness. Mistakes are expensive. Good advice is usually much cheaper than preventable mistakes. That is the rule I trust. And finally, we come to the area where cheapness often hides behind procrastination, retirement investing. This is one of the cruelest places to be casual because time does the heavy lifting, and time is the one thing you cannot cheaply recover later. Most people understand compounding in the same way a child understands weather. They know the word, they have felt something related to it, but they do not truly respect its scale. Compounding is slow enough in the beginning to feel optional. That is why so many people delay it. They are not irrational in the way they imagine. They are simply underestimating the power of time. A person in his 20s or 30s looks at retirement and feels it is so far away that today still belongs entirely to consumption. A nicer apartment, a better trip, a little more comfort, a little more performance of success. He tells himself he will invest seriously later when income is bigger and life is more settled. Life rarely becomes as settled as people hope. What usually happens is this: delay becomes habit, the standard of living rises, the structure gets more expensive, the money that could have been compounding is gone. And later, the person is no longer investing against time. He is racing time. That is an ugly race. Because time is what turns ordinary, consistent investing into large future numbers. Without time, the whole machine becomes much harsher. The person who starts early does not have to be brilliant. The person who starts late has to be much more aggressive or sacrifice much more. That is why beginning early is not just helpful, it changes the whole burden of the future. The earlier you begin, the smaller the recurring effort required to build something meaningful. That is an extraordinary gift, and it is one of the most common gifts people throw away, because the cost of delay is invisible when the future still feels remote. I do not like invisible costs. They are where a lot of financial weakness hides. The world has done a poor job teaching people this. It teaches them to optimize current life visually, not future life structurally. It rewards display now and punishes discipline later. That is backward. If you understand the true power of time in markets, you stop treating retirement investing as something to begin once life becomes comfortable. You begin while life is still ordinary and maybe a little inconvenient. That is where the great advantage lives. Each dollar invested early has years to replicate itself. not metaphorically, mathematically. That is the miracle. Not because it is mystical, because it is patient. Patience is one of the highest return assets available to ordinary people, and almost no one wants to own enough of it. So when I think about the things that are simply not worth being cheap about, I see a pattern. Knowledge buys time and compresses confusion. Milestone memories buy meaning in moments that do not repeat. Health buys function, energy, and the ability to enjoy everything else. Tools buy output and reduce friction. Security buys continuity and protects against devastating interruptions. Professionals buy judgment where your own knowledge ends. Retirement investing buys the one thing no later purchase can replace. Time in the compounding machine. These are not decorative categories. They are structural categories. They shape the quality, resilience, and direction of a life. That is why I think the whole conversation around money should be reframed. The goal is not to spend less in every possible place. The goal is to stop spending thoughtlessly where money vanishes and to start spending intelligently where money improves the architecture of life. That is a far more sophisticated standard. A person who understands this no longer asks one simple question. How do I save money here? He asks a better question. What am I really buying or giving up if I make the cheaper choice? That second question changes outcomes. It forces value into view. Am I saving cash and losing time? Am I saving cash and lowering my future income? Am I saving cash and weakening my health? Am I saving cash and making my work worse? Am I saving cash and increasing the odds of catastrophe? Am I saving cash and risking a much bigger mistake later? Am I saving cash and stealing years from compounding? These are the real questions. Once you ask them honestly, some cheap decisions stop looking clever very quickly. This does not mean go spend wildly. That is the childish interpretation. It means know the role of the dollar before you deploy it. Some dollars should be protected, some should be invested, some should be used to buy strength, some should be used to buy meaning. And yes, many should be held back from trivial leakage. That gives little lasting return. I have always believed that wise living is not extreme living. It is selective living. Selective in what you compress, selective in what you expand, selective in where you are demanding on price, selective in where you are demanding on value. That is how money becomes a servant instead of a source of endless anxiety. A lot of poor financial behavior comes from treating all expenses as morally similar. They are not. A cheap shirt is not the same category as cheap medical neglect. A cheap meal out is not the same category as refusing to invest in retirement. Free random advice is not the same category as paying for real professional guidance when the stakes are high. That is the mistake. Flattening all spending into the same moral category. Once you do that, you begin optimizing for the wrong thing. Low price instead of high value, and low price alone is a dreadful compass. I would rather spend more once on something that truly strengthens my life than spend less repeatedly on choices that keep weakening it a little at a time. Weakening is usually how people get into trouble. Not through one theatrical catastrophe, through a series of small false economies. Cheap food that hurts energy, cheap tools that steal time, cheap advice that creates expensive mistakes, cheap attitudes toward exercise and sleep that quietly lower output, cheapness around insurance that magnifies one bad event, cheapness around learning that prolongs ignorance, cheapness around retirement that steals the best advantage compounding offers. These things add up. The person making them often feels careful. In reality, he may be making his future more expensive. I have never wanted a future made expensive by my own misunderstanding. If I can spend $1 and create $5 of value, reduce $10 of future pain, or increase the odds of a far better life structure, I do not feel poorer by spending it. I feel more intelligent. That is how I want people to think. Not as spenders or savers first, as allocators. That is what we all are, whether we use the word or not. We allocate money, time, attention, energy, and risk every day. The better allocator usually wins, not because he pinches every penny, because he knows which pennies are actually seeds and which ones are simply being thrown into the wind. That is the whole game. And if you learn that early enough, money becomes much easier to use well. Not because you become richer overnight, because you stop stepping over the things that truly matter in order to feel clever about the things that do not. That alone can change an entire life.